Hellmart really gives off that sensation of a project born from a specific and obsessive idea. Taking the night shift at a convenience store in the middle of nowhere and turning it into a cycle of routine plus horror that doesn't just rely on cheap jump scares. You can feel that Gaze In Games built the studio practically around this concept as the project that needed to happen, and that gives the game a very authorial feel. Another thing that carries a lot of weight in this context is the fact that it's a game handled entirely by the developer herself, acting as both dev and publisher, which always changes the type of risk and freedom the project has. It doesn't feel like one of those indies lost amidst 1,000 features. On the contrary, everything revolves around the idea of supermarket simulator meets dynamic horror, with very clear communication on both the Steam page and the official site. The demo also tells an interesting behind-the-scenes story. It became a sort of calling card, with very good ratings on Steam and coverage on horror gaming sites, creating that silent pressure of, okay, now version 1 needs to be bigger than a 3-night concept. The feeling is that the team used the feedback from the demo to reinforce this day and night loop, managing the store, hitting sales quotas, then surviving strange customers and the something prowling outside instead of trying to reinvent the whole game halfway through. What stands out most in this context is how heavily they are betting on adaptive systems, both for customer behavior and for the horror itself. As a player, this gives the impression of a project that is ambitious in the right measure. It's not a gigantic open world, but it is a game that wants every shift to be different, which complicates development and balancing quite a bit for a small studio. There is also a very clear reading of game designed for PC first, with support for multiple languages and a focus on a very tight experience around mouse, keyboard, or controller, without trying to be multi-platform from day one. In a development context, this usually means more controlled testing cycles and the chance to refine the experience a lot before thinking about porting to consoles, rather than releasing everything at once and running around putting out fires. Looking at the demo and everything that has been shown, the impression is that Hellmart is at that sweet spot where the concept has already won. Everyone understands in seconds what the game is, and the vibe of a convenience store in the snow with bizarre customers works immediately. The story of Hellmart seems simple on the surface, but what has been shown so far makes it clear that it wants to hook you with routine and then suffocate you with paranoia. You are just an employee at the end of the world, trying to make easy money and disappear from people until you realize that the night there has its own rules. The premise works great for me because it is extremely human. I went to a remote place to start over. Except the game already warns you with that corporate boss tone that you aren't exactly a person there, you are a replaceable part. And this meshes well with the idea of hitting sales quotas by day, and if you fail, facing horrible consequences, as the demo itself shows, transforming small shop capitalism into a literal threat. In the demo, those first 3 days, the narrative doesn't come in a cutscene explaining everything. It comes in sensation. The isolation of the North, the strangeness of the customer flow, the store being too small to protect you, but big enough for you to feel watched. This choice fits perfectly with the concept the developer is selling. A quasi-normal daily life that, without you noticing, turns into a nightmare. The strongest point of the story, for me, is the mental game it proposes with the customers. Evil can mimic anyone, so every interaction becomes a social reading test under pressure. When the game puts you in the position to decide who enters and who stays outside, it isn't just creating mechanical tension. It's building a very direct theme of guilt, responsibility, and selfish survival, and this feels like it will be the axis of the endings. And there is a detail I really like. The narrative seems to understand that good horror needs preparation. The night part, barricading doors, checking cameras, tending to the generator, doesn't sound like a minigame. It sounds like you trying to impose logic on a situation that clearly has no logic at all, and this friction gives the plot personality. Another hit is how the game implies that the story will be, in part, authored by the player. Dynamic systems that adapt to how you play, and actions that change the fate of customers and the ending. If this holds up well in the full game, it could lead to those moments where a person swears they only did the right thing, but the result shows that in that place, the right thing doesn't exist. Only what you could bear to do exists. Overall, what has been released so far gives me confidence that Hellmart doesn't just want to be market with jump scares, but rather a little story of moral survival disguised as a simulator. You went far away to escape people and end up having to decide the value of every life knocking at your door. The gameplay grabbed me precisely by mixing two very different sensations: the autopilot of a store simulator and the growing paranoia of a first-person survival horror when night falls. In the demo, which revolves around surviving a few initial shifts, the daytime loop is the kind of task that seems simple but hooks you because it gives that satisfaction of routine. Serving customers, organizing, meeting quotas, circulating through the market, and tidying up the house. And the detail is that this routine isn't there just to fill space. It creates a calm rhythm that makes the shock of the night period much more efficient. When the horror part starts, the gameplay shifts gears in a way I liked quite a bit. You leave the comfort of everything is under control and enter a constant reading of the environment with decisions like hiding, fleeing, or trying to defend yourself. What worked best for me is how the game tries to transform normal things, a customer entering an empty aisle, a noise, into triggers of doubt. And that brings us to Hellmart's big bet: the idea of a threat that can mimic customers and systems that react to your behavior. Even with just what the demo and release materials suggest, this has the potential to create that type of fear that doesn't rely only on scares, but on you checking patterns and mistrusting your own reading of the shift. Another thing that caught my attention in the demo is how the store becomes a board for survival. There are moments where the priority is no longer selling or organizing, but ensuring the place keeps running and stays safe with actions like maintaining the generator, observing, and preparing. This gives nice weight to the space because the market stops being just scenery and becomes a tool, and at the same time, a trap. In terms of control and general feeling, based on what was shown and what the demo delivers, it seems like a game that wants to put you in gradual tension, not a roller coaster of jump scares. I particularly enjoy when horror invades a common activity, and Hellmart really nails this. The night gets scarier because the day taught you to believe that place was manageable. My only reservation, based on the feel of the demo, is that the game will need to vary the events and shift situations well. So this formula doesn't just become good routine plus repeated night. But looking at what has already been divulged and the proposal of variable behavior, one can be optimistic that the full game uses this base to create more unpredictable and personal nights, the ones where you swear you made the right decision and paid dearly for it anyway. The graphics gave me a very clear impression. It's not that AAA horror that tries to win on hyperrealism, but it is competent in creating a credible and uncomfortable place, which is exactly what this proposal of a 24-hour store in the middle of nowhere needs. In the demo, what worked best for me is the art direction of the store itself. Narrow aisles, shelves, the counter, and that convenience store look everyone recognizes. And precisely because it is a normal environment, any detail out of place, a strange shadow, a dark corner, movement at the end of the aisle gains strength because the game doesn't need to fill the screen with monsters all the time to make you tense. Lighting is the heart of the visuals here, and you can feel it was designed as a fear mechanic, not just as polish. The atmosphere of night and the late shift, with less illuminated areas and higher contrast, is what adds the seasoning of psychological horror on top of the everyday setting. In terms of fidelity, you can notice the focus is more on readability and atmosphere than on ultra-detailed textures. I thought this was a smart choice for the type of game it wants to be, because what scares you isn't seeing a screw in 8K, but feeling that you are alone in a place that should be safe, and the visuals contribute to that sensation. The character visuals, from what can be observed in the demo, are where I feel the indie DNA the most. Sometimes the animation and model detail don't have the same weight as the environment. But, ironically, this might even help the game's horror, because that slightly weird air makes everything more uncanny, more wrong, as if you were looking at someone who isn't 100% human. Overall, my opinion is that Hellmart seems like a game that understands that good graphics for horror are graphics that sustain the mood and readability, and in that regard, it is well on track for launch. From what the demo showed me, Hellmart's performance is good enough to sustain the tension and work loop, but you can still feel it's an indie project polishing the rough edges until launch. What I noticed most while playing is that when the game is in the right rhythm, it holds immersion well. Walking around the store, serving customers, and doing tasks doesn't feel heavy. And this is important because the game's foundation depends on this continuous flow for you to relax before the horror kicks in. At the same time, in some transitions like changes in moments, states of the shift, there is that sensation of a micro stutter that doesn't totally break it, but reminds you there is still optimization to be done. In the night scenes, performance becomes part of the fear, but in a dangerous way. First-person horror needs quick response and frame time consistency, because any little drop or stutter the moment you turn the camera to check a hallway ends up feeling more like a technical problem than planned tension. One thing that makes me a bit more confident is that the team itself commented on a new build of the demo with fixes and performance improvements, which indicates they are looking at this actively and not dragging their feet. This type of pre-launch adjustment is usually where the game clicks, especially in a title with a repetitive loop and a lot of first-person camera movement. On the more grounded side, it's worth aligning expectations with the requirements that appear on the game pages. The list cites Windows 10 and a very common hardware set like i5 or Ryzen 5 and 8 GB of RAM, which suggests a goal of accessibility but doesn't guarantee perfect stability on every machine. And since SteamDB points to detected technologies in the app, including Unity and items related to DLSS, the feeling remains that the game might try to offer paths to improve performance depending on the setup. Personally, if the final version maintains what the demo already delivers, I expect an okay to good experience on mid-range PCs, but with a higher risk of stutters precisely in the heaviest moments. Lighting, scares, and anything that increases particles or post-processing. This is the type of game where I sacrifice a bit of visual quality without thinking twice just to gain stability, because fear works better when the control is precise. My impression is that Hellmart is on the right path, but performance will be one of the factors deciding if it becomes a cult classic of the supermarket from hell or just a good idea with uneven execution. If I had to bet, I'd bet they arrive at launch with better performance than the initial demo, because there have already been public signs of a build with improvements. Now it's about seeing if this translates into FPS consistency during critical moments. It is worth buying Hellmart at launch if the idea of store simulator plus horror has already won you over, and if you enjoy getting into indie games early to follow the evolution and first fixes. If your tolerance for technical rough edges is low bugs, initial balancing, optimization, then the best move is to wait for at least the first updates and post 0 public feedback. What would make me buy on day one is that the demo already shows a strong loop. By day, you go into cashier, routine autopilot, and when night falls, the game changes tone and transforms the same space into a threatening place. This contrast is the soul of Hellmart, and if the full game expands well on this formula with a variety of events and more unpredictable nights, it could be a very memorable experience right off the bat. On the other hand, the demo also makes it clear why waiting might be wise. There are already some bugs like items that don't scan right, and the feeling that performance still needed work. In a first-person game with chase, sequences, and tension, these flaws weigh more than in a relaxing simulator, because any little freeze or inconsistency in the system breaks the fear at the wrong time. Another thing I would put on the scale is, do you want surprise or do you want a polished product? Buying at launch is entering the atmosphere without knowing exactly everything the game is going to throw at you, and this type of horror based on broken routine works better when you haven't memorized patterns yet. The game is recommended first for those who like horror with atmosphere and growing tension and not just random scares. Second, for those who enjoy job games, organizing, serving, meeting, quotas, and find it fun when a game uses mundane tasks to build immersion. It is also a great target for those who enjoy liminal, commonplace horror, convenience store, late night shift, cold lighting, because the setting and the declared proposal revolve exactly around this. An employee alone in a 24-hour business in the remote north, dealing with strange customers and dangers after dark. And yes, it is a very single-player experience game, so it fits really well for those who like playing with headphones and getting into the mood. I would not recommend it for those who get frustrated easily with indie harshness and want zero chance of bugs and uneven optimization. In those cases, the most honest recommendation is to wait. Pick up the game after the first patches, when the community has already mapped out problems and the developer has had time to stabilize the final version.